Yes, people, what's happening? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to 5 Things That We Learn, the show where I go through all the major talking points from the previous England game. And before we get into it, guys, please make sure you smash the likes on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Just under 30 subscribers from 2K. Every new subscriber helps, so please do hit that subscribe button and help me out. And whilst you're down there, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know if you agree or disagree with anything I've said, and let me know if you think England can win the World Cup or not. But let's get right into it. England last night, 0-0 draw against the US, a terrible, terrible performance. All the positives from the 6-2 win against Iran in the opening game disappeared. Everything that England did well in that game, they didn't do well against the US. And the only positives were the fact that actually we defended pretty well and we kept a clean sheet. Other than that, we were exceptionally poor off the ball, really poor on the ball as well. Front line was terrible, midfield was terrible, as were the fullbacks. And it's important to kind of put this into context. In the bigger picture, this result doesn't really matter that much. It's a point. It's 4 points from 2 games, and we're top of the table. And to go into the last game, we just need to avoid losing 4-0 to Wales, and we qualify. So that obviously isn't going to happen. We are going to qualify, but it would be naive and stupid, in my opinion, to just brush last night under the carpet and pretend that everything was all right, and that level of performance doesn't matter because we've got 4 points and we're still going to qualify. Whilst that is true, we can't ignore what we saw, and it was dreadful from England. From really started well, first 5, 10, 15 minutes even, but as soon as that happened, after 15 minutes, we were second best in every single department, and the US were far better than us. All over the pitch. Christian Pulisic had a really good game. The midfield three I thought were outstanding in McKennie, Tyler Adams, and Musa. And England really struggled to deal with it. And they can be lucky that we came away with a point. But ultimately, the main situation is that we're top of the group and we just need to avoid losing 4-0 to Wales in the last game on Tuesday, and we qualify. So yeah, in the bigger picture, I said that's not an issue. But what is an issue is what we saw last night was awful. And is that kind of something that is going to be a problem going forwards? And I believe there are certain aspects of last night that are going to be an issue going forwards. But I'm going to get into my 5 things now. And the first big one for me is, where on earth was Phil Foden last night? Where was he? Just left on the bench, unused sub in a game that England were creating nothing in. And, a generational talent, one of the best players this country's produced in a long time, doing great stuff in the Premier League for Manchester City, and yet can't even get on the pitch in a game where England are so desperate for some creativity, so desperate for someone that can do something. And Gareth Southgate turns to Jordan Henderson instead of him. I mean, everyone that was watching the game, myself included, I was hoping that Southgate would turn to Foden. And it was, I have to say, it was quite frankly baffling that, he remained on the bench when the game was crying out for some creativity. If Phil Foden's played 19 minutes across these opening 2 World Cup games, and if you told me that kind of before the tournament had started, I would have thought, oh, he must be injured. And, if you're asking me to select my best England 11, Phil Foden's in it. He is. Speak to any kind of football fan, anyone that's kind of watches the Premier League, and to suggest that Phil Foden isn't England's most naturally gifted footballer is ridiculous. I have to say, at least 70-80% of people would say so, and the rest simply aren't paying enough attention. He is by far the most talented English footballer we've got at the moment. And for Southgate to turn to the bench and opt for Marcus Rashford ahead of him, to opt for Jordan Henderson ahead of him, even to opt for Jack Grealish ahead of him, I'm a massive Jack Grealish fan. I think he makes a big difference for England. But to suggest that, we should be going to him instead of Phil Foden is worse. I mean, let's put it this way. Would Pep bring Jack Grealish on before Phil Foden for City if they were looking for a winning goal? I'd have to say that is very, very unlikely. But what I must say is, I must be slightly fair to Southgate as well, is that Foden's not produced his Man City form in an England shirt. That's for sure. But the bigger question for me has got to be, how can that be fixed? And we've got to find that out sooner rather than later, preferably in this tournament, because Phil Foden belongs on this big stage. I'm not going to pretend that he's not had opportunities for England, because he has. He played in the Euros and whatnot, and he's still very early in his career. But at the end of the day, there's no is the problem Phil Foden, or is the problem England? Because it surely, for me, cannot be that difficult to accommodate a talent of Phil Foden in the starting lineup, let alone for him to be the first go-to player from the bench. You know, Foden played in the last Euros, and at this point, you would have thought he'd be firmly established in the England team now, but he's not, and others have seemingly jumped ahead of him. You know, Saka seems to be ahead of him, and I have to say I've got no problem with Bukayo Saka starting ahead of Phil Foden. His Arsenal form has been superb, and whilst Raheem Sterling, who's been awful this season, utterly terrible for Chelsea, he has been one of the best players in the Southgate era, so I can understand that loyalty to him. But at the end of the day, what I put it down to is I just simply think that Southgate has got absolutely no idea how to use Phil Foden. If let's look at any other major nation, Phil Foden plays for Spain, he plays for Brazil, he plays for France, he plays for Argentina. Any other of the top nations, Phil Foden is in that team and the team's being built around him. And for me, Gareth Southgate simply has no idea how to use him. You know, Foden plays for a manager in Pep Guardiola, probably the best manager in the world, who raves and has developed him into a world-class talent, you know. And you've seen him perform week in, week out in the Premier League, scoring goals and putting in fantastic performances. But he's playing for a manager that plays on the front foot, and his first thought is to always win games. And unfortunately for England, Foden is playing for a manager in Southgate who is so risk averse, hasn't got a risky bone in his body. His first thought is to set up not to lose. And he'd rather not lose than look to win a football match. And that was so evident last night. That's by leaving Phil Foden on the bench, Southgate was just more than happy to play for a point rather than take any risks. And I'm sorry, but it's those negative tactics. I know that risk-averse way of playing, which is going to be England's downfall at the end of the day. You cannot just play risk-averse football and expect to do well. Yes, I know that, you know, you can't argue with Southgate's tournament record because it speaks for itself, and he's done better than any England managers have done. But ultimately, from 4 years ago against Croatia in that semi-final, you know, things have changed. You've got a much better squad of players. You've got much better players on the bench to call from. And this World Cup is going to be won from the bench. And it's vital that Southgate gets those calls right. And to leave someone like Phil Foden on the bench in this game, Southgate must have been the only person watching last night that thought that game didn't need Phil Foden. And even someone that has completely got no idea about football, has got no tactical knowledge, would have known Foden has to play in this game. So I really can't work out why Phil Foden didn't play. But for me, it's the same. It's the same with Trent. Trent plays for Spain. He plays for France. He plays for Brazil, and whatnot. I know he's not defensively the best, but again, he plays for a manager that's always on the front foot in Jurgen Klopp, one that's always looking to win football matches. And ultimately, I think the reason why Phil Foden's not playing is because Gareth Southgate is so risk averse, and it's at the detriment of Foden. It's at the detriment of the country, unfortunately. That for me, you know, Southgate he said it all. He was happy to get a point rather than go for the win against the US, which is why he left Phil Foden on the bench. And, you know, last night, Foden created as many chances as Sterling, Mount, and Kane, and yet he didn't play one single minute in that game. So, yeah, that's my point on Phil Foden. Someone as good as him has simply got to play. And that is on Southgate to get him into the side, because any other major nation is building a team around Phil Foden all day, every day. And for him to not feature at all for England, I'm not saying necessarily start. I think he should start. But to not be the first player to come from the bench is, I'm sorry, it's an absolute travesty. But moving on to my next point then. And I want to start with a positive, the only positive last night. I thought Harry Maguire on his 50th cap was outstanding. Again, he's had a really good tournament so far. I thought it was good in the first game against Iran. Yes, a slight mistake, possibly for one of those Iran goals, but he looked a threat from set pieces. He defended well. And he is someone that, you know, I've criticised a lot for Man United. He's become a bit of a laughing stock, and it's not been acceptable, kind of the level of criticism and abuse that has come his way. But in an England shirt, you know, you have to say that he's actually more often than not, he's stood up and to be counted for, and he's played really, really well for Gareth Southgate and in an England shirt. And again, he was very good last night. He's a big threat from set plays. He's commands the area. He defends well, and he was a real plus. So credit where credit's due. You know, Maguire and Stones really good last night. And again, we've seen England look to be defensively solid first and then build from there. But yeah, the centre backs were a positive. That was the only positive from last night. And I have to say, credit where credit's due to Harry Maguire. He has performed well this World Cup, and he hasn't let anyone down in an England shirt. And I think from a Manchester United perspective, this could add a few more pounds onto his price tag, as they probably will look to get rid of him because he's just not getting a look in there at the moment. My next point is that of Harry Kane, and it's a bit of a conundrum that we've got. Everyone knows that Harry Kane's going to pretty much play every minute of every game if he's fit, but I think England, I know it might sound silly, are almost way too reliant on Harry Kane. Last night he had a poor game, and he didn't really look right. You know, you could tell there was still heavy strapping on that ankle. He didn't look up for it, and it's a concern going forward. You know, how bad actually is that ankle? Yes, we know there was nothing kind of bad showed up from the scan, but you could tell that he didn't look himself. And the fact that he's still playing with heavy strapping on that ankle is a bit of a concern for me. But I'm not really sure what you do, because everyone knows how important Harry Kane is to this side. But you know, it's 2 games now without a goal, and he tends to start tournaments pretty slowly. He started the Euros slowly as well. I don't think he even scored in the group stage of the Euros. He's not scored so far in this World Cup. I don't think it's a complete disaster, but it's clear that he's not 100% fit. And that is a concern for England, because England without Harry Kane, it is a big problem. Yes, Callum Wilson could come and do a job. Yes, you could try something a little bit different, maybe kind of try that kind of false nine, that more fluid front line with no kind of out and out forward. But ultimately, England's hopes do rest on what Harry Kane can do. And he was dreadful last night. I think a big problem for him was the fact he was really isolated. He was coming so deep to try and get the ball. And I think that was occupying a lot of the space that Mason Mount and Jude Bellingham would potentially use. So, yeah, Kane's fitness is a concern. I'm not going to say his form's a concern, because he started the Euros really slowly and then he kind of burst into life in the knockout rounds. But to have your striker not scoring is never ideal, and he doesn't look fit. And that for me is a bigger problem for England going forwards. My next point is that of Southgate's post-match comments. I was really disappointed in those post-match comments, and I think it kind of summed him up as a manager and what he's like. You know, he was absolutely buzzing to get a point against the USA. I mean, come on, like what are you doing? You know, it's almost like, you know, we've got a point against prime Brazil. You know, celebrating like we've done so well to get a point against the US. I was really disappointed in those comments. You know, how he was so happy with that result and seemingly really pleased with the performance. You know, look, he might not want to come out and criticize the players in public, and maybe it was different in the dressing room, but the fact that he was genuinely really, really pleased with that performance, for me, is a concern going forwards. It really is, because I don't understand how he can be happy with that performance at all, apart from the fact that we were defensively solid. There cannot be any positives, and he can't be happy with anything that he saw on the pitch. But I really don't know. I don't know if he's just saying that to protect the players, or I don't know if he's saying that because he genuinely believes it. But I was really disappointed in his comments after the game, because, you know, this is England. You know, we got a great group of players, and yet, you know, we shouldn't be celebrating and be delighted with a point against the US. I mean, I thought it was bordering on embarrassing how, you know, at 60 odd minutes, he was happy to settle for a point. You know, come on, go for it a bit more, be more proactive. You know, the same thing's going to keep happening. It really is. So I was really disappointed with that. And another point is that Southgate's inability to react. And this ultimately, I think, is what's going to cost England. You know, an inability for the manager to react to in-game situations. Anyone could see that game required a change at possibly half time, but certainly 10 minutes into the second half. Don't wait 20 minutes into the second half to make a change. Why? There's no reason for that whatsoever, to wait that long to make a change. You know, he's got to be more on the front foot. He's got to be more proactive. And this, you know, being reactive rather than proactive situation is going to cost England. It really is. And unfortunately, Southgate has got to be more proactive. He's got to take more risks. He's got to play more on the front foot. He really does. And people will say, oh, yeah, but, you know, look at his tournament record. Oh, he's done really well. It's just about getting through the games. It is. But this World Cup, as I said earlier, it's going to be won from the bench. And it's vital that Southgate gets this right. You've got 5 substitutions now, and England have got really good strength in depth. And he's got to get that right. He's got to use it. And ultimately, Southgate waits too long to make substitutions. And anyone could have seen last night what that game was calling for changes so much earlier than there was. But for some reason, he just simply refused to make them until it was kind of too late for them to make an impact. So, yeah, I was disappointed in that. And I think that's where Southgate's shortcomings are brutally exposed, is that at the top level, you know, he just isn't quite that good as a manager. And it's as simple as that for me. But yeah, that's my 5 points, guys. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below if you agree or disagree. Smash the likes on the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. It's not all doom and gloom for England. You know, we're very much going to qualify for the last 16, and it is kind of two tournaments in essence. The first part is the group stage, and then when it gets to the knockout stages, it's completely different. But it would be naive of me and stupid of me to not come on here and do this video and criticize what I saw last night, because what I saw last night was not good enough. But guys, catch you again soon. Up the England.